The unthinkable. The phone call came at 2:17 a.m. I've always feared middle-of-the-night calls, those harbingers of news too terrible to wait for daylight. My trembling hand reached for the phone on the third ring. "Mrs. Reynolds, this is Mercy Hospital. Your son James has been admitted with a suspected brain aneurysm. You should come immediately." The world tilted on its axis. At 65, I had lived through my husband's death a decade earlier, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. James, my brilliant, kind-hearted, only child, couldn't be dying. It wasn't the natural order of things. I arrived at the hospital, still wearing my nightgown beneath my coat, hair uncombed, hands shaking as I gave my name at the reception desk. A grim-faced doctor led me to a private consultation room, and the words that followed destroyed my world. Massive aneurysm. No warning signs. Nothing could have been done. Already gone. Already gone. My James, gone. Hours blurred together as paperwork was processed and decisions no mother should ever make were thrust upon me. It was nearly noon when Sophia, James's wife of 10 years, finally arrived. Designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, expensively manicured nails tapping impatiently on her phone. There was traffic, she offered without meeting my gaze, and I had to find someone to watch Lucas. I had already called Lucas's school, spoken with his teacher, and arranged for him to spend the day with his best friend's family. The fact that Sophia hadn't thought to do this, that she'd left their 8-year-old son without information about his father's condition, was sadly typical of the woman my son had married. "James is gone," I said simply, watching for the reaction that would tell me how to respond. Sophia's perfectly lipsticked mouth formed a small O of surprise. Her hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture that might have seemed natural if I hadn't spent years observing my daughter-in-law's calculated performances. "But he was fine yesterday," Sophia said, her voice catching. "We had dinner, and then he was working in his study. I went to bed early. I didn't even say goodnight." For a moment, genuine regret seemed to flash across her face, quickly replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. Relief, calculation. Whatever emotion had surfaced was quickly masked by a more appropriate expression of shock. As the day progressed, I watched Sophia make phone calls in hushed tones, stepping away whenever hospital staff approached with questions about funeral arrangements. When decisions needed to be made about James's remains, Sophia deferred to me with a casualness that seemed oddly detached. "You know what he would have wanted better than I do." By evening, as we waited for James's body to be released to the funeral home, Thomas Bennett arrived. James's closest friend since law school and his personal attorney. His genuine grief was apparent in his reddened eyes and tight embrace as he held me. "I can't believe he's gone," Thomas whispered. "I just had lunch with him on Monday." I nodded, unable to form words through my grief. Thomas turned to Sophia, offering condolences that were met with a practiced, somber nod. "We'll need to meet soon," Thomas said, his professional tone returning slightly. "There are matters in James's will that will need immediate attention." Sophia straightened at this, dabbing at eyes that remained suspiciously dry behind her sunglasses. "Of course. Perhaps tomorrow. I'd like to get things settled quickly for Lucas's sake." The mention of my grandson pierced through my fog of grief. Lucas, sweet, sensitive Lucas, who had lost his father and whose mother was already thinking about settling things quickly. "Lucas should be told in person," I said firmly. "I'll go with you to pick him up." "That's not necessary," Sophia replied quickly. "I can handle my own son." The slight emphasis on "my" wasn't lost on me. It was a familiar dynamic, Sophia asserting control over Lucas when it suited her narrative as devoted mother while relegating actual parenting to James. And increasingly to me. "He adores you," Sophia added, her tone softening artificially. "He'll need his grandmother more than ever now." The manipulation was transparent to me. After 30 years as a psychology professor, I'd studied enough human behavior to recognize what she was doing. Sophia was already positioning herself, ensuring I would remain available for child care while establishing clear boundaries of authority. As we left the hospital, I caught sight of Sophia checking her reflection in a window, adjusting her hair before pulling out her phone to make another call. In that unguarded moment, with no audience to perform for, her face showed neither grief nor shock, only cool assessment. like someone calculating their next move in a chess game. I turned away, my heart breaking anew. Not only had I lost my beloved son, but it appeared my grandson was in the hands of a woman who saw his father's death as an inconvenience at best, an opportunity at worst. What I couldn't know then was that James had foreseen this very scenario and had taken extraordinary measures to protect both me and his son from the woman he had finally recognized as a threat to us both. In the coming days, as I struggled through the fog of grief to arrange my son's funeral, I would begin to uncover the breadth of James's foresight and the depth of Sophia's deception. But that night, as I returned to my empty house alone, I could only clutch my son's childhood photo to my chest and wonder how I would find the strength to face the days ahead. For Lucas, I told myself, I must be strong for Lucas. Something in Sophia's behavior had triggered every protective instinct I possessed. My grandson had lost his father. I was determined he wouldn't lose his grandmother, too. Not when I suspected he would need me more than ever. A devastating midnight call has shattered my world, but something doesn't feel right about my daughter-in-law's reaction to my son's death. What secrets was James keeping about his failing marriage? And what measures did he take to protect us before his untimely death? I couldn't know then that my greatest challenge as a mother was just beginning. I've attended enough funerals in my 65 years to recognize genuine grief. It manifests differently in each person. Some collapse inward, some rage, some grow eerily calm, but there's an authenticity that can't be fabricated. As I sat in the front pew of the church, watching people approach my son's casket, I observed a masterclass in emotional performance from my daughter-in-law. Sophia had dressed impeccably in a designer black dress that managed to be both appropriate and flattering. Her hair was styled in subdued waves, her makeup subtle yet flawless, tear-proof mascara evident as she dabbed occasionally at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She leaned against me at calculated intervals, murmuring things like, "He would have appreciated such a turnout, and James always spoke so highly of everyone here." To observers, we appeared as a united front of grief, the devastated widow and the heartbroken mother supporting each other through unimaginable loss. Only I could feel how lightly she rested against my shoulder, ready to straighten the moment someone important approached. Only I noticed how her eyes constantly scanned the room, assessing each mourner's social and financial status. Only I caught the subtle changes in her voice when speaking to James's wealthier clients versus his childhood friends. But my attention was primarily focused on Lucas, seated on my other side, his small body occasionally shaking with silent sobs. Unlike his mother, my grandson's grief was raw and real, his face blotchy from genuine tears. I kept my arm around him, offering tissues and quiet comfort as he stared at the casket containing his father. "Is Daddy really in there?" he whispered during a lull in the service. "His body is," I explained gently. "But the special part that made him Daddy, his love, his thoughts, his spirit, that's still with you always." Lucas nodded, seeming to understand this distinction better than many adults. "I can still feel him sometimes, like he's watching." "I believe he is," I said, fighting back fresh tears. Sophia leaned across me. "Lucas, sit up straight. People are watching." I felt his small shoulders stiffen under my arm. This concern with appearances rather than her son's emotional state was precisely why James had been increasingly leaving Lucas in my care over the past year. After the service, the procession of mourners offering condolences seemed endless. James had been well loved by colleagues at his law firm, by clients he had helped, by neighbors and friends. Each person had a story about his kindness, his integrity, his subtle humor. "Your son helped me keep my house during my divorce," one woman told me, clasping my hands. "He reduced his fees when he learned I was struggling, then connected me with financial advisors who helped me get back on my feet. James was the only attorney who took my discrimination case when no one else would," an elderly gentleman said. "He cared about justice, not just billable hours." These testimonials were bittersweet balm to my aching heart. My son had lived his values, had made a difference. I stored each story carefully in my memory, knowing Lucas would treasure them someday. Throughout the reception, I noticed Sophia having intense whispered conversations with several people, including a tall, expensively dressed man I didn't recognize. When I approached, they separated smoothly, Sophia introducing him as Richard Harlow, one of James's real estate investment partners. "My condolences, Mrs. Reynolds," he said, his handshake brief and impersonal. James was a remarkable man. Something in his tone rang false, and the way Sophia's hand briefly touched his arm suggested a familiarity beyond business acquaintance. I filed this observation away, my professor's brain automatically cataloguing behavioral details, even through my grief. By evening's end, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. Lucas had fallen asleep on a couch in the funeral home's private room, emotionally spent. As I arranged his suit jacket over him like a blanket, Thomas Bennett, James's attorney, approached quietly. "Eleanor, could we speak privately for a moment?" I followed him to a secluded corner away from lingering mourners. "James left explicit instructions about certain matters," Thomas said, keeping his voice low. "I can't go into details yet, but he asked me to tell you one thing immediately: trust your instincts about Lucas. Does that make sense to you?" I glanced toward my sleeping grandson, then at Sophia, who was checking her makeup in a compact mirror while nodding absently at condolences. "Yes," I said slowly, "I believe it does." "Good. We'll need to meet officially tomorrow about the will. But James wanted you to know that. Arrangements have been made for both of you." Before I could ask more questions, Sophia approached, her social smile firmly in place. "Thomas, I hope we can resolve everything quickly," she said. "I'm thinking of taking Lucas away for a while after this. A healing trip. Probably best to handle the estate matters promptly." "Of course," Thomas replied neutrally. "My office, tomorrow at 2. As we prepared to leave, I gathered Lucas into my arms, his slight weight a precious burden. Sophia made no move to help, instead scrolling through her phone. 17 missed calls, she sighed. So many arrangements to make. I studied her composed face, noting the absence of grief's telltale signs. No swollen eyes, no exhaustion of spirit, none of the physical manifestations of heartbreak that were currently crushing me from within. "What arrangements?" I asked carefully, keeping my tone curious rather than accusatory. "Life goes on, Eleanor," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Bills, accounts, notifications. James handled everything. Now it's all on me. Not us. Not we'll figure it out together for Lucas." The solitary me spoke volumes. As I settled Lucas into my car, Sophia had asked if I would keep him overnight to give her space to process. I felt a strange sense of foreboding mixed with something else. Something that felt almost like my son's presence, urging me to stay vigilant, to watch carefully, to protect what he could no longer protect himself. "We're going to be okay, Lucas," I whispered to my sleeping grandson. "Somehow, we're going to be okay." I didn't yet know how prophetic or how challenging that promise would prove to be. The funeral reveals striking contrasts between Sophia's calculated performance and Lucas's genuine grief. As I observe my daughter-in-law's suspicious behavior, a cryptic message from James's attorney suggests my son anticipated trouble. What arrangements did James make before his death? And what is Sophia already planning while we're still saying goodbye? James left everything to me. Sophia's perfect composure slipped for the first time as she sat in Thomas Bennett's office the day after the funeral. I watched her face cycle through emotions, first smug satisfaction, then confusion, and finally thinly veiled outrage as Thomas continued reading the will's provisions. "Not exactly," Thomas corrected, his professional tone unchanged. "Mr. Reynolds left you the Lake House property, his investment portfolio with Meridian Partners, and a life insurance policy of $500,000. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, as Thomas outlined the inheritance that had left Sophia increasingly agitated. While substantial by most standards, nearly $1 million in total, it clearly fell short of her expectations. The family home at 1742 Oakwood Drive, both vehicles, and his personal bank account at First National are bequeathed to his mother, Eleanor Reynolds, Thomas continued, not meeting either of our eyes as he read directly from the document. "That's impossible," Sophia interrupted, her carefully manicured nails digging into the leather armrests. "We purchased that house together. It's our marital property." Thomas slid a document across the desk. "The house was purchased solely in James's name before your marriage. It was never converted to joint property. The deed and mortgage documents confirm this. I kept my expression neutral, despite my own shock. James had never mentioned any of these arrangements to me. The family home, a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms and a backyard where Lucas had his treehouse, was apparently mine, not Sophia's. So were James's Mercedes sedan and Range Rover, along with a bank account I hadn't known existed. What about Lucas's college fund? Sophia demanded, her voice rising slightly. James always said he was setting aside money for Lucas's education. Thomas nodded. Mr. Reynolds established a trust for Lucas's educational expenses. You are not the trustee of this account. Then who is? Sophia's question came out as nearly a hiss. Thomas glanced at me briefly. Eleanor has been named trustee of all funds related to Lucas's care and education. The room fell silent as Sophia processed this information. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes, totaling assets, weighing options, formulating responses. This makes no sense, she finally said, her voice deliberately modulated to convey wounded confusion rather than the anger I could see simmering beneath. James and I discussed our estate plans. This is nothing like what we agreed upon. Thomas cleared his throat. The will was updated 3 months ago. James came to me specifically to make these changes. Everything is legally executed and witnessed. 3 months ago? Sophia's eyes narrowed. He never mentioned any changes to me. That was his prerogative, Thomas replied simply. I remained silent, absorbing the implications of what I was hearing. 3 months ago, James had secretly revised his will to ensure I would have the family home and financial resources while limiting Sophia's access to certain assets. The timing corresponded with a period when James had seemed particularly troubled, often bringing Lucas to stay with me for father-son weekends that I suspected were actually meant to give James space to deal with marital issues. There must be some mistake, Sophia said, turning to me with a practiced look of appeal. Eleanor, you know James would have wanted his family to remain in their home. You have your own house. Surely you don't intend to take ours away from Lucas. The subtle manipulation was impressive, framing any enforcement of James's wishes as me taking something from my grandson rather than from her. I recognized the tactic but chose not to confront it directly. I'm as surprised as you are, Sophia, I said truthfully. I need time to process all of this. Thomas continued with additional details, items about personal effects, specific bequests to charities, funeral expenses that had been prearranged. Throughout it all, I noticed Sophia texting under the table, her face a mask of appropriate grief, occasionally disrupted by flashes of calculation. When the meeting concluded, Thomas asked me to stay behind for a moment. Once Sophia had left with a tight-lipped promise to talk soon directed at me, he closed his office door and sat across from me. There's more, he said quietly. James left this for you with instructions to give it to you privately after the initial reading. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my son's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I took it. Should I? I gestured to the envelope. Take it home, Thomas advised. Read it when you're alone and ready. And Eleanor, he added, his professional demeanor softening, James knew exactly what he was doing. Trust that. I nodded, slipping the envelope into my purse as I rose to leave. In the lobby, I found Sophia engaged in an intense phone conversation, her back turned to the receptionist's desk. I paused, out of sight but within earshot. Completely blindsided me, she was saying, her voice low but furious. The house, the cars, even access to Lucas's education fund. No, I don't think he suspected anything. Must have been his mother's influence. Of course, I'm going to fight it, Richard. I've put in 10 years with this family. I deserve more than some vacation property and insurance money. I retreated silently, taking the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator where Sophia might see me. My mind was racing with questions, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. James had anticipated something I was only beginning to understand. Back in my own modest home, with Lucas still at school, I finally opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single page of stationery from James's law office. Mom, if you're reading this, the unthinkable has happened. I'm so sorry to leave you with this burden, but there's no one I trust more. My marriage has been failing for some time. What began as growing apart has evolved into something more concerning. I've discovered things about Sophia that make me fear for Lucas's future emotional well-being and for your security. I've arranged things to protect you both. The house, cars, and money aren't really for you. They're tools to ensure Lucas has one stable, loving parent figure when I'm gone. Sophia will fight this. She'll try to manipulate you. Don't let her know what you know or suspect. Watch and wait. Document everything regarding Lucas's care. Thomas has the rest of my instructions and evidence I've gathered. He'll help when the time is right. I love you, Mom. You taught me to see people clearly and to plan ahead. I'm counting on those same qualities now to protect my son. James. I pressed the letter to my chest, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. Even facing his own mortality, James had been thinking of protecting his son and me. Now I understood my mission clearly. For my son's sake, for Lucas's future, I would need to become something I'd never been before, a strategic opponent in what was clearly going to become a battle of wills and manipulation with Sophia. It was time to put my psychology background to its most important use yet. James's will reveals shocking arrangements that leave Sophia furious and me stunned. Why did my son secretly transfer so many assets to my name? His private letter confirms my worst suspicions about Sophia and gives me a sacred mission: protect Lucas at all costs. But to outsmart my calculating daughter-in-law, I'll need to hide what I know and play a longer game than she expects. Grandma, when is Dad coming back? Lucas's innocent question over breakfast 3 days after the funeral pierced my heart. At 8 years old, he was old enough to understand death conceptually, but still young enough to hope for impossible miracles. Oh, sweetheart, I said gently, setting down my coffee cup and taking his small hand in mine. Remember what we talked about? Daddy can't come back. His body stopped working because of the aneurysm in his brain. Lucas nodded, eyes downcast. I know, but sometimes I forget when I first wake up. I keep thinking he'll come make pancakes like on Saturdays. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I know it's hard. I miss him too, every minute. Would you like me to make pancakes on Saturdays now? They wouldn't be the same, he mumbled, then quickly added, but I'd like that anyway. I was staying at James's house, my house now, according to the will, to help care for Lucas while Sophia dealt with important paperwork, as she'd vaguely explained. In reality, I suspected she was meeting with her own attorney to contest James's will, but I kept this thought to myself. After dropping Lucas at school, where his teacher had been wonderfully supportive, I returned to the house to find Sophia waiting in the kitchen. She'd let herself in with her key, dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that conveyed businesslike mourning. Eleanor, she greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that didn't reach her eyes. I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about arrangements going forward. Of course, I replied, maintaining the polite, somewhat deferential demeanor I'd decided to adopt as my strategy. Would you like some coffee? She seated herself at the kitchen island, watching as I moved around what was technically now my kitchen. This is so overwhelming, she said. The paperwork, the accounts, the decisions. I can only imagine, I murmured sympathetically, playing my role while remembering the angry phone conversation I'd overheard. How can I help? Sophia's perfectly made-up face registered brief surprise at my accommodating tone, quickly replaced by calculated warmth. You're so kind, Eleanor. Actually, I've been thinking about what makes the most sense for everyone, especially Lucas. Here it comes, I thought, keeping my expression open and receptive. This house has so many memories of James, she continued, her voice taking on a practiced tremor. Every room reminds Lucas of what he's lost. It might be healthier for him, for both of us, to make a fresh start somewhere else. I nodded thoughtfully while placing a mug of coffee before her. You're considering moving? I found a lovely condo downtown near the cultural district. Excellent schools nearby, walking distance to the art museum and library. She stirred her coffee deliberately. The thing is, Eleanor, with the way James arranged things, I'll need your cooperation. Oh. I tilted my head questioningly, as if I hadn't already anticipated this conversation. The will situation is obviously some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. James would never have intentionally put me in such a difficult position. Her tone hardened slightly before she caught herself. I've spoken with an attorney who suggests we could avoid lengthy legal proceedings if you'd simply transfer the house to me, as James would have wanted. I widened my eyes, projecting thoughtful consideration rather than the indignation I felt at her attempt to manipulate me using my son's supposed wishes. I see, I said slowly. And what does your attorney say about the fact that James updated his will only 3 months ago specifically to make these arrangements? A flash of irritation crossed her face before her mask of reasonable grief returned. James wasn't himself in recent months. He was working too hard, stressed about cases. He wasn't thinking clearly about our family's best interests. I nodded as if considering this explanation. That must have been difficult for you both. It was, she sighed dramatically, which is why I believe he would want us to correct this oversight. Now, for Lucas's sake. The invocation of Lucas's welfare, her trump card, was deployed exactly as I'd expected. I took a deliberate sip of coffee, giving myself time to formulate my response. I understand your concern, I said finally. But making hasty decisions during grief isn't wise. Perhaps we should give ourselves some time to adjust before making major changes. Sophia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, you need time. But the condo I found won't be available for long. It would be so much easier for Lucas if we could settle things quickly and let him start healing in a new environment. I recognized the sales tactic, creating artificial urgency to force a quick decision. My years teaching negotiation strategies to psychology students hadn't been wasted. Why don't we ask Lucas how he feels about moving? I suggested mildly. He might find comfort in staying in the home where he has so many memories of his father. Children don't always know what's best for them, Sophia countered smoothly. That's why adults make these decisions. Besides, he's already dealing with enough emotional turmoil. I noted how skillfully she'd positioned herself as the protective parent while subtly suggesting I would harm Lucas by consulting him about his own feelings. James's letter rustled in my memory. She'll try to manipulate you. You're probably right, I conceded, watching relief flash across her features. Let me think about it all for a few days. This has been such a shock. Of course, she agreed, clearly believing she'd made progress. Take the weekend. But Eleanor, she added, her voice dropping to a confidential tone, I'm worried about finances with the way things stand. James handled everything, and now I'm finding credit card bills, the mortgage. The mortgage that was now my responsibility, according to the will. But I kept this observation to myself. I'd be happy to help review the household accounts, I offered, seizing the opportunity. Perhaps we could go through everything together. That's not necessary, she said quickly. I just meant that resolving the house situation would help me access the equity we've built for Lucas's education and well-being. The education fund that James had specifically placed under my control as trustee. I wondered if she realized how transparent her motivations were to someone trained to observe human behavior. Let's talk more next week, I suggested, rising as if our conversation had reassured rather than alarmed me. I should get some rest before picking up Lucas from school. After Sophia left, I sat alone in the quiet house, mentally reviewing our interaction. She clearly believed I was a grief-stricken, somewhat passive older woman who could be maneuvered into surrendering what James had entrusted to me. For now, I needed her to continue believing exactly that. I picked up my phone and called Thomas Bennett. I need to understand exactly what evidence James collected, I told him without preamble, and how we can gather more. This is going to be a longer game than I anticipated. Sophia wastes no time trying to manipulate me into signing over the house, using Lucas's welfare as emotional leverage. Playing the role of a compliant, grief-addled mother-in-law, I appear to consider her proposal while secretly planning my counteroffensive. James warned me she would fight dirty, but he didn't know his mother was ready to fight smarter. The performance has begun, and I intend to be the better actor in this dangerous production. Grandma, Mom says I have to go with her to Miami next weekend, but I don't want to. Lucas's troubled face looked up at me as I tucked him into bed, 1 week after James's funeral. This was the first I'd heard of any Miami trip, which immediately raised red flags. Miami? I kept my voice casual while my mind raced. That sounds like an adventure. Lucas shook his head, clutching his stuffed dinosaur tighter. She says her friend Richard has a boat, and will stay at a fancy hotel, but I have my science project due Monday, and Dad always helped with my projects. I smoothed his hair gently. Have you told your mom about the science project? She said I can skip it. That teachers understand when your dad dies. His voice caught on the word. But Dad wouldn't want me to skip it. He always said commitments are important. Your father was right about that, I agreed, making a mental note of this conversation. Let me talk to your mom tomorrow. Maybe we can work something out. After Lucas fell asleep, I called Thomas Bennett at his home number, which he'd provided for urgent matters. Miami. Thomas's voice sharpened when I explained the situation. With Richard Harlow, you know him? I asked, surprised. He's the real estate developer I mentioned in our meeting yesterday, the one James had concerns about, Thomas said, his tone carefully measured. Eleanor, did you install the home monitoring system I recommended? Yes, the technician finished today. Cameras in the common areas and the security system that sends alerts to my phone. I'd followed Thomas's advice to improve home security, though the underlying purpose was different than what a grieving family might normally install. Good. That recording capability may prove valuable. He paused. I'm sending you some materials from James's private file tomorrow by courier. Don't open the package where anyone might see you. The next morning, after taking Lucas to school, I received a sealed manila envelope. Inside were printouts of text messages between Sophia and someone saved in her phone as RH, dated from various points over the past 8 months. James had apparently gained access to her phone records through means I chose not to question, given his legal background. The messages painted a damning picture, an affair that had begun almost a year ago, plans made and broken, complaints about James working late, about being trapped in her marriage, references to Lucas as the complication in their relationship plans. Most disturbing were exchanges from just 2 months ago. RH, how long are we going to keep this limbo going? You said you were ready to leave. Sophia, patience. Jay's name is on everything important. Need to get financials in better position first. RH, working on it. The Kaiman property isn't going to wait forever. Perfect opportunity for fresh start. Sophia, trust me, a few more months, maximum. Everything will fall into place. I sat back, hands shaking slightly. These weren't just messages documenting an affair. They revealed Sophia had been planning to leave James but wanted to secure financial assets first. Had James discovered these messages and changed his will in response? Is that why Sophia had been so shocked by the provisions? Another document in the package was a private investigator's report James had commissioned, containing photographs of Sophia and Richard Harlow entering a hotel together, expense reports showing gifts he'd purchased for her, and background information on Harlow's business dealings, some of which appeared ethically questionable. The final item was a handwritten note from James to Thomas, dated just 3 weeks before his death. Tom, enclosed is everything I've gathered. Not sure what my next steps should be. Confronting her could jeopardize my access to Lucas if things go badly. Need to protect him above all. We'll meet next Thursday to discuss options. James had died on Tuesday. The meeting never happened. Armed with this knowledge, I approached my conversation with Sophia about the Miami trip strategically. I waited until she came to pick up Lucas's weekend bag that Friday afternoon. Lucas mentioned you're planning a trip to Miami, I said, keeping my tone light, curious rather than confrontational. Just a quick weekend getaway, Sophia replied, checking her designer watch. Good for him to have a distraction. He's worried about missing his science project deadline, I mentioned casually. You know how James always emphasized academics? Sophia's smile tightened. A weekend off won't hurt his GPA, Eleanor. The school psychologist actually recommended new experiences to process grief. I nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense, though I wonder if a boat trip with Richard it might be a bit much so soon after losing his father. Lucas seems anxious about it. Her eyes narrowed slightly at my mention of Richard's name. Lucas will be fine. Children are adaptable. They certainly are, I agreed, though sometimes they need familiar routines during trauma. I'd be happy to keep him here to finish his project if that would help your plans. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, weighing the freedom of a child-free weekend against her need to maintain the appearance of devoted motherhood. That's thoughtful but unnecessary, she said finally. This trip is about mother-son bonding. Of course, I conceded, then added innocently, oh, I've been meaning to ask. Do you know the password to James's home computer? Lucas was hoping to find some photos for a memory book his counselor suggested. I don't keep track of James's passwords, she said dismissively. Have Thomas check his office files. Another note for my growing mental catalogue. Sophia claimed not to know James's passwords, information that most spouses would share. I'd already found his password notebook in his desk drawer, but her response was telling. One more thing, I said as she turned to leave. Lucas's teacher wants parent volunteers for their field trip to the Science Museum next Wednesday. Since I'm not officially a parent, I thought you might want to sign up. The children who've lost parents apparently find these outings especially difficult. It was a test, one I suspected she would fail. Wednesday, I have an all-day spa appointment. I've been waiting weeks for mental health care, she added with a performative sigh. You understand? Of course, I said sympathetically. Self-care is important during grief. I'll explain to Lucas's teacher. After she left with a promise to return Sunday evening with Lucas, I immediately called Thomas. She's taking Lucas to Miami with Richard Harlow, I reported. I need to document this trip carefully. Already on it, Thomas assured me. I've engaged the same investigator James used. We'll have photographs of everything. Miami is actually helpful for our purposes. It shows her priorities clearly. And if Lucas is upset by the trip, I couldn't keep the worry from my voice. Document his emotional state when he returns. Have him talk to his counselor about it. Every reaction becomes evidence. I hated viewing my grandson's pain as evidence, but I understood the necessity. Building a case for Lucas's well-being meant carefully cataloguing everything that threatened it. As I prepared for a weekend alone in James's house, my house, I thought about the theatre production unfolding around us all. Sophia, playing the grieving widow while planning escapes with her lover. Me, playing the supportive mother-in-law while gathering ammunition. Even Lucas, unconsciously providing crucial insights through his innocent comments and reactions. The only person not performing was James, whose absence remained the most powerful presence in our lives. I touched the framed photo of him on the mantel. I'm watching, James, I whispered, just like you asked me to, and I'm learning more than Sophia realizes. Disturbing evidence reveals Sophia has been planning her escape for months, viewing Lucas as a complication in her affair with Richard Harlow. As she whisks my grandson off to Miami with her lover, I maintain my performance as the supportive mother-in-law while carefully documenting every poor parenting decision. James had begun building a case before his death. Now I'm continuing his work, gathering evidence that will eventually protect Lucas from a mother who sees him as an afterthought in her new life plans. Lucas returned from Miami with sunburned shoulders, a stomach ache from too much ice cream, and emotional withdrawal that broke my heart. He trudged into the house Sunday evening, hours later than Sophia had promised to bring him back, his small face tight with exhaustion. How was your trip, sweetheart? I asked, kneeling to his level as Sophia texted rapidly on her phone behind him. Lucas shrugged, eyes downcast. The boat made me sick. His being dramatic, Sophia interjected without looking up from her screen. It was just a little motion sickness. The resort was 5-star. The weather was perfect. He had a wonderful time. Lucas's expression told a different story, but he remained silent, casting a quick glance at his mother before mumbling, "Can I go to my room?" "Of course," I said gently. "I'll bring up some ginger tea for your tummy in a few minutes." As he trudged upstairs, I noticed he wasn't carrying his backpack. Did Lucas forget his school bag? Sophia waved dismissively. It got wet on the boat. Nothing important in it. His science project materials were in that bag, I pointed out carefully, keeping accusation from my tone. He can get an extension. I'll write a note. She finally looked up from her phone, her expression daring me to challenge her. "Richard sends his regards, by the way. He was disappointed you couldn't join us." The brazen mention of her lover made my stomach clench, but I maintained my facade of oblivious politeness. "How thoughtful. I hope you enjoyed your weekend." "Very much," she replied, a hint of triumph in her smile. "Richard has wonderful connections in Miami. We're considering investment opportunities there." "How nice," I murmured, making a mental note of this casual admission of future plans. "I should check on Lucas." Upstairs, I found my grandson sitting on his bed, staring at a photo of James on his nightstand. The room was exactly as he'd left it Friday, homework still spread across his desk, work he clearly hadn't touched all weekend. "Want to tell me about the trip?" I asked gently, sitting beside him. His lower lip trembled. Mom was on her phone the whole time. She and Richard talked about boring grown-up stuff and left me with the hotel babysitter, even at night. My heart sank. "The whole night?" He nodded miserably. "2 nights. The babysitter fell asleep watching TV, and I got scared because I didn't know where I was when I woke up. I called Mom's room, but she didn't answer." I kept my expression neutral while inwardly seething. That must have been frightening. "Richard has a big boat, but he wouldn't let me touch anything. He said, 'Kids mess things up.'" Lucas picked at a loose thread on his comforter. "And Mom laughed when he said that, even though Dad always let me help steer our little boat." Each detail was another piece of evidence, another example of Sophia prioritizing her new relationship over her son's emotional needs. I made careful mental notes to record later in the journal Thomas had suggested I keep. "Did you tell Mom you were scared or upset?" I asked. Lucas shook his head. "She was having fun. She told me in the car that it's important for her to be happy again, and I shouldn't make things harder by complaining." The manipulation of making an 8-year-old responsible for his mother's happiness, especially one grieving his father, sent a surge of protective anger through me. I pushed it down, focusing instead on comforting Lucas. "It's okay to have feelings about things," I told him, pulling him gently against my side. "Even when grown-ups are having fun. Your feelings matter, too." He leaned into me, his small body relaxing slightly. "Dad always asked about my feelings." "I know, sweetheart. I know." After getting Lucas settled with tea for his stomach and helping him salvage what we could of his science project, I documented the evening's revelations in my journal, adding them to the growing catalogue of concerning behaviors. Thomas had explained that establishing patterns was crucial. Any single incident could be explained away, but consistent patterns of neglect or poor judgment would build our case. Over the next 2 weeks, those patterns emerged with disturbing clarity. Sophia began staying out late without explanation, leaving Lucas with me more frequently. She missed his school conference, sending me in her place with a vague excuse about estate meetings. She forgot to refill his asthma medication, necessitating an emergency pharmacy run when he had a mild attack during soccer practice. Each incident was meticulously documented in my journal. Each one showed a mother increasingly detached from her son's daily needs. While I stepped in to fill the void, I was careful not to criticize Sophia directly to Lucas, focusing instead on providing the stability and attention he craved. The security system I'd installed captured telling moments. Sophia bringing Richard to the house late one evening, both slightly intoxicated, unaware that Lucas was awake, and witnessed their intimate behavior in the kitchen. Sophia instructing Lucas to remember to tell Grandma you had a great time today, after a rushed outing where she'd spent most of the time on business calls. Multiple instances of her promising Lucas she'd attend his activities, then cancelling at the last minute. My performance as the supportive, somewhat naive mother-in-law continued throughout. I offered to help with Lucas's care in ways that seemed generous rather than strategic. I expressed understanding when Sophia claimed grief brain for forgotten commitments. I avoided confrontation when she made thinly veiled comments about moving forward with selling the house. "Eleanor, we need to discuss the house situation," she said one evening, 3 weeks after James's death. She'd arrived unexpectedly while I was helping Lucas with homework, dressed for what was clearly a dinner date rather than a mother-son evening. "Of course," I replied amiably. I've been meaning to ask what items you'd like to keep when I move in permanently next month. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows arched in surprise. Move in? I thought we agreed the house should be sold. Oh, I don't recall agreeing to that, I said mildly. Actually, I've been thinking it's best for Lucas to maintain stability right now. His therapist mentioned how important familiar environments are during grief. Her expression hardened momentarily before she forced a concerned smile. I'm worried about you, Eleanor. This house is far too large for you to manage alone, and the financial burden of the mortgage, utilities, maintenance. James left the house free and clear, I mentioned casually, watching her reaction. No mortgage to worry about, and I'm more capable than I look. All those years managing a university department taught me quite a bit about handling complex responsibilities. Something shifted in her assessment of me, a recalculation that I could almost see happening behind her eyes. I'd revealed myself as slightly more formidable than she'd assumed, yet still maintained my helpful, non-threatening demeanor. We'll discuss it more later, she said finally. I need to run. Important dinner meeting. Lucas has already had dinner, and he should be in bed by 9 o'clock. After she left, I sat with Lucas at the kitchen table, helping him rebuild the science project whose materials had been lost in Miami. As he carefully glued pieces of his solar system model together, he looked up suddenly. Grandma, are you going to live here now instead of Mom? The question caught me off guard. Why do you ask that, sweetheart? He shrugged, focusing intently on positioning Mars at the correct distance from his styrofoam son. Mom told someone on the phone that you're trying to take the house from her. She said you were being selfish. I chose my words carefully. Your dad wanted to make sure we all had safe places to live. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about the details. I want you to stay, he said simply. You help me with homework and remember my medicine and make real food instead of just ordering pizza. His straightforward assessment of the situation, so innocent yet so perceptive, reinforced my determination. This wasn't just about following James's wishes anymore. It was about protecting a child who clearly recognized, even at 8, the difference between performative parenting and genuine care. I'll do my very best to stay close, no matter what, I promised him. It was the only promise I could make with absolute certainty while the larger battle continued to unfold around us. The aftermath of the Miami trip reveals disturbing patterns in Sophia's parenting as she increasingly neglects Lucas for her relationship with Richard. I carefully document each instance while maintaining my supportive facade. Lucas's innocent observations confirm what I already know. Sophia sees him as an inconvenience in her new life plans. The house becomes our first battlefield, but the war is really about something far more precious, a vulnerable boy who deserves better than a mother who remembers him only when it serves her purposes. I'm thinking of taking Lucas to my parents in Arizona for a few weeks. Sophia's announcement over morning coffee, nearly 4 weeks after James's death, seemed casual, but the timing set off immediate alarm bells. I had just informed her that Thomas Bennett needed to meet with us again regarding additional estate matters. Arizona? I kept my voice neutral while stirring my coffee. That's quite a distance. What about Lucas's school? Sophia waved dismissively. He can miss a few weeks. Children are resilient. James's favorite phrase, children are resilient, sounded hollow coming from her lips, a convenient excuse rather than a thoughtful observation. When were you thinking of going? I asked, mentally calculating how this might align with the increasingly urgent timeline Thomas had mentioned. Next week, ideally, she said, checking her expensive watch. My parents have been begging to see him, and frankly, I could use the support system. Being a sudden single mother is overwhelming. I bit back the observation that she'd been essentially a single mother by choice for months, given how often she delegated Lucas's care to James and me, even before the affair began. That's understandable, I said instead. Though I wonder if such a big trip might be difficult for Lucas right now. He's just getting back into his school routine, and his grief counselor mentioned consistency is important. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Are you suggesting I don't know what's best for my own son? Not at all, I backpedaled, maintaining my non-threatening persona. Just thinking out loud. I'm sure you've considered everything carefully. I have. Her tone softened, becoming almost conspiratorial. Actually, Eleanor, I wanted to discuss something important with you. Could we have dinner tonight? Just the two of us? I'll have my assistant watch Lucas. Your assistant? Richard's assistant, she corrected smoothly. Melissa is wonderful with children. She's helped with Lucas before. Another detail for my journal. Sophia was leaving Lucas with her lover's assistant rather than his grandmother, who lived 15 minutes away. I made a mental note to ask Lucas about these previous occasions.